Lust, it may not be what you think it is. Preachers, teachers, and all people who are entrusted with the ministry of helping people discern the components of a healthy and integrative spiritual and moral life need to be responsible in their teaching. It is harmful to the spiritual life of the people who look for guidance and discernment to be misled or distracted from what is essential and important. For the scrupulous person, the deliberative choice in selecting the resources and the source of spiritual guidance and pastoral care is all important. There is more than enough anxiety and more than enough suffering that results from the experience of a scrupulous conscience. This deliberate awareness and pastoral sensitivity is always important, and the essential starting point in any reflection that I choose to provide as part of this ongoing effort to faithfully serve those who carry the burden of scrupulosity. It's not helpful or being faithful to the tradition of the church to simply set it aside when offering direction and guidance. It is in fact irresponsible. It is also not helpful for the teacher to mislead or to dramatize normal human actions into serious sin or temptation when it is not. There is simply no excuse for bad or careless pastoral care. I take the responsibility of teaching and providing good pastoral care very seriously. I never for even a moment discard the moral teaching tradition of the church. I always apply orthodox spiritual and moral teaching in a manner that is never compromised. I believe that while I'm diligent in this way, I can provide good pastoral teaching and helpful guidance. I believe you expect no less from me, nor should you. Today I want to talk about lust. I want to propose to you that what you might understand about this subject may not in fact be helpful or even a correct understanding. As we consider together this very important subject, please be patient in the development of the perspective. Wait until I conclude the presentation and then reflect on the entire context of what I present before you form a judgment. It is not at all unusual when we reflect together on a subject that it's challenging to discover a clear and descriptive illustration of the subject matter. In this instance, we are blessed to have a wonderful and illustrative biblical story. There is a very clear and very descriptive illustration of lust that is offered for us in the story of King David and Bathsheba that's found in 2 Samuel chapter 11. If you're unfamiliar with the story, please stop this video to take the time to read the story before we continue. The story is memorable because it's a story about King David, who is an essential personality in the biblical story of salvation. It's also an important story because the story clearly illustrates the sin of lust and the consequences of the sin. Many people, and I would count the scrupulous among them, believe that lust is basically the sin of having an impure or sexual thought about another person. They routinely base their interpretation and understanding of this sin upon the words of Jesus. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 to 28. Seemingly, the teaching is very clear and unambiguous, and it is, but not in isolation. Again, the interpretation is dependent on the complete context of the story, not just a verse or two. This is where the biblical story of King David and Bathsheba helps us understand what lust is and helps us understand what lust is not. For a totally natural sexual attraction or erotic thought, completely normal to both men and women, to become the sin of lust, something more is required. It is not the thought alone. It also includes the power to engage the thought into an action. King David committed lust, not because he was sexually attracted to Bathsheba, but rather because he arranged to meet her, engaged in sexual intercourse with her, attempted to cover up their actions, and then ordered the murder of Uriah the Hittite, the husband of Bathsheba. It is an erotic story, but it is also a story about the raw misuse of power. For a sexual thought to be understood as lust, power is essential. The person who is committing the sin of lust must have the power to engage in some manner or form with the focus of their lustful desire. It's not just the thought, as strong as a thought or desire might be. It is most importantly the actions that follow, with all the decisions and the consequences that are part of the action. Lust is not just something that occurs in the mind, a strong but fleeting erotic thought or impulse. Lust takes root in the person. It begins to define a person's thoughts and actions. It becomes more and more focused. The desire that is nourished by lustful thinking and planning becomes all-consuming. All of this focused energy on the person or even the object of desire eventually takes root in the heart, understood in the biblical sense as a person's center for both physical and emotional, intellectual, moral activity. This is where the story of King David and Bathsheba becomes even more helpful and illustrative. All the actions that King David engaged in order to use his power to enter into a relationship with the object of his desire required planning. The actions were not impulsive. They were deliberative and indicative of a real effort in order to make the action what he intended it to be. Bathsheba did not suddenly appear in his bed because of wishful thinking or some sort of magic. It was his sustained and deliberate maneuvering that resulted in her appearance. When we consider sin, especially when we consider something as serious sin or grave sin, we should take our discernment very deliberately. We do a real disservice to our moral life and our spiritual life when we too casually label everyday, normal, God-given, human emotion and feeling as something that it is not. Erotic thoughts and feelings are a God-given gift to us. They are essential to who we are as human beings. Just because I might have a powerful feeling or even a feeling that causes me anxiety, that does not mean that I've committed a sin. It means that I had a strong feeling or emotion that caused anxiety. Lust is a big word. Lust can be a serious sin. Jesus seriously considered lust to be disruptive to respectful human living and not at all helpful in building up the kingdom of God. He warned his apostles and disciples about becoming distracted in the pursuit of kingdom living by reorientating personal energy and effort to something or to someone that does not give life. He was well aware of the consequences of this kind of disorientation and strongly warned against it. Jesus counseled a kind of single-mindedness for the kingdom of God, a kind of single-mindedness that includes normal human emotions and feelings, thoughts and desires, because that is how we were created by our loving Father. Jesus was never speaking about intrusive thoughts or passing thoughts or normal human thoughts, feelings and emotions when he was teaching his disciples about the kingdom of God. He was speaking about sustained, discerned, and focused actions and decisions. He was not speaking about a little part of the story. He was speaking about the whole story from beginning to end, the entire context, not just a single passing notion or thought. Lust. In fact, all the sins that we routinely identify as capital sins or deadly sins, including the other 6 sins of pride, greed, gluttony, envy, anger, and sloth, are all sustained, deliberate, intentional, and prolonged human experiences that essentially change a person's behavior. The change in behavior leads to a complexity of consequences, each of which becomes more and more serious over time. Again, think of King David, the entire story, not just the singular moment on the rooftop of his house where it all started. Serious sin is serious. It should be taken seriously, understood completely, and rooted out whenever it has taken over the life of a person. That is why we call it mortal. It leads to the death of the person, both spiritually and often in actuality, when the consequences become no longer manageable. The challenge for a scrupulous person is to choose to refrain from using a big and serious word to describe something that's not big, not serious, but rather totally understandable.